Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me out there? Is this it's working? Good. Okay. First, I want to take a picture so I can prove to my wife that I was here. There we go. Thank you. So this is my first Industry Week conference, and it's great to be here. I see some familiar faces out there, and to some of you, I may be known as the Toast guy. I made a video a few years back, actually quite a few years back now, and it's about continuous improvement, and it's about direct observation, and those are both very important parts of, creating change in an organization. More recently, I started a blog. It kind of started as a joke in the office, with people arguing about my age, or joking about my age. So it's called Old Lean Dude. So I'm making please check it out. It's on the web. Every week I write something. I never know what I'm going to write, and I probably should qualify that I'm never sure exactly what I'm going to say either. So as we begin today, I know I have a tack time of about an hour, and I'm going to try to stick to that. Excuse me one second. I should also mention that GBMP, the organization that I work for and have worked for the last 11 years, is a nonprofit with a mission essentially to keep good jobs at home. This is why I got into this line of work. Prior to that, I was a manager in industry for a lot of years, long time. I hate to say it, but I'm no longer one of the younger people who attends the conferences, so I'm going to try to share with you some experience that I learned along the way. And I just want to mention in the back, for those of you who'd like an attractive tattoo, I have a Made Lean in America tattoo that I left for everybody here. If you put this on, it doesn't come off for several weeks. So be careful. Okay. Be careful. So organization, I probably should say, this is the advanced track. It's kind of odd trying to segment these things and figure out what advanced is, because arguably organization is something you got to deal with from the very first day you decide that you're going to do this. But I think maybe it falls into advanced because it's not something we typically think about on the first day. So I'll often advise people, there's two things that you absolutely should think about, even though you probably don't think about them on the first day. One of them is take a hard look at your organization. Try to figure out what moves it, what changes it. Now, I'm going to talk about what I mean by organization in a moment, but it's more than just people. We think of organization and we think of teams of people and departments and such, and that's a part of it. Okay, but those walls, those are an organization too. Many things define an organization. How many of you have read Robinson Crusoe? Okay. Or you've heard about it. You probably saw the movie. So Robinson Crusoe is a guy who washes up on the shore. He's got nothing. He's shipwrecked. Oftentimes, when we're starting out, for those of you who are lean leaders, maybe that's how you feel. You're shipwrecked. Nothing's working. Every company's a little bit different. Sometimes there's a great deal of pain. Sometimes there's less pain. But there's always something which is creating this need to create a change. The difference between you and Robinson Crusoe is that Robinson Crusoe went about the task of recreating merry old England on a desert island. He was essentially recreating what was already familiar to him. It was the status quo. And by the end of the book, he's living pretty comfortably, but it's essentially the same customs, same traditions, same organization, same everything that he would have seen in England. Whereas your task, if you're a change leader, is to somehow or other create an organization, a mindset, a culture, if you will, which is totally different than what you started with. So it's a very different task. Organization is kind of what we do as people. You came in this morning and we started out in sort of a random distribution. It was sort of entropy at work. You filled in. Everybody picked a spot. You organized. You figured out where you were going to go. And this is what we do every day. And once we're comfortable with that, we stick with it. If you've never been to, you've probably been to a session where it's 5 days session, and every day you come in, you sit in the same place you sat the day before. You're organizing. Your mind is working that way. So organization is something which we need to understand in terms of creating change, because it's very important for sustaining the change, but it's also very important for sustaining the status quo. I have a couple of quotes from, several of my heroes. One of them, I know there's some speakers here from Millikan. Early along in my personal journey, this quote comes from, I think, 1988. Roger Millikan, who just passed last year, I think, and worked actively in his company at the age of 95. Chair of one of the largest privately held organizations in the world, made this comment, and it really stuck with me, that these things hold us back. And so early along, I was thinking about management. I was in management, but I recognized that, it was not just me changing. It was about changing everything that management does. And why is that an issue? Then in 2003, a person who's very important in my learning, Hajime Oba, was asked why American businesses were so slow to adopt TPS. And he said, and this is a mouthful, you kind of have to read through this. He says, well, American management just doesn't know what TPS is. Okay, we need to know what it is. Okay, and so I'll speak to that a little bit, but it's very important to have that philosophy and that underpinning in order to move forward. And if you don't, then kind of the discussion of organization is moot. If you're not heading in the right direction, it doesn't really matter what organization you have. Now, I'm not here to talk about that particular philosophy today, but I feel I need to address it up front. And the last comment, which comes from a guy who's, written many books, all of them worth reading, some redundant, but just little gems of, this is a person who is, credited with, maybe fairly or unfairly, but credited with creation of things like Poka-yoke and set of production. But the greatest gems from Shingo come from his thought about organization and people, and he writes a great deal about it. Really important to study what Shingo had to say. So I want to try to put this all in one big model. This is a term that I coined. It's actually a book that's about written, and it's based upon the thinking of my personal thinking and also the thinking of Shingo and Ono and various other people I've met, some famous, some just people like me. And it has to do with the idea that, we want people to make improvement, but in order for that to happen, we have to create an environment where that's even possible. So getting back to Mr. Oba's comment, first there's this need to understand what true north is. Then there's this term that Mr. Shingo used, volition. I didn't even know what that meant. I had to look it up. It means will. It means impassioned will. It means excitement. And, I've been an examiner for the Shingo Prize almost since its beginning, and I must tell you that without that, there's never been a plant I visited, I'm sure it's true with Industry Week's plants as well, that's been successful without that impassioned leadership. Not necessarily at the top, it's got to be somewhere. There's somebody who leads the way, and that person doesn't do it alone, but it begins with that, and that volition. And, of course, the closer it is to the top, the more likely it is that you're going to move things along. And then, of course, there's strategy. There's alignment. That's not always the thing that we start with. We're starting with little pieces, little areas where we can make improvement. And strategy, ironically, even though it seems like the most logical thing to do, is not always the easiest thing to do because you don't necessarily have the attention of the people who could even create that strategy. You're kind of starting where you can. Often we're starting in the middle somewhere. Now we get to organization, which is the part that I'm going to talk about today. It's really important, and there's Kaizen for management, which relates specifically to that organization. It doesn't happen by itself. A few years ago, I was in this company, and I've been working with them for a while, and it was one of these kind of dysfunctional arrangements where there was a vice president of manufacturing, which is what they called machining, and a vice president of assembly, which it all kind of seemed like manufacturing to me, but not to them. And these guys were duking it out. They had different ideas. And I met with the president, and he said, I feel that if we give this time, it's going to work itself out. And I said, David, this is never, ever going to work itself out. It's only going to get worse. You can't turn a blind eye to this. You are responsible. This is your Kaizen. You have to identify what kind of change you can create, or this will only get worse. You will never, ever succeed. Okay? So this is what organizational Kaizen is about. This is a book I like reading. I'm a shop floor guy, pretty much. but I think there's a lot that can be learned from books, and they're not all about manufacturing. This one was actually from the guy who coined the term information society back in the early 90s, Stan Davis. And it's a great book. It's still relevant today. He was talking about, discontinuous change. I'm not sure what he knew about lean, but he was just looking at the world and saying, we can't continue on the same model that we had. Our improvement is discontinuous. Things are changing here, and we've got to deal with that. And he made the comment that organization follows strategy. Okay? Well, that's true. That's true. But organization is really fixed, like these walls here, or like the policies in your company, or like the bills of material, or like the different quality policies. That's all part of organization. It's things that are fixed, and there's departments who are there to make sure that it stays fixed. And what happens when the tail wags the dog? This is why this is so important. It's why you can't just assume that when you change strategy that something is going to happen, that the rest is going to follow. And this idea of the goldfish bowl actually comes from a guy named Mullah Nasruddin. In the 13th century, he was the guy who talked about the fact that, when you're in a goldfish bowl, and there's a lot of them in business, any business. Every business I work, there's people in goldfish bowls. Sometimes, they're aquariums. They're bigger. Sometimes it's a whole tank. Sometimes it's a whole set of aquariums. It could be divisions. It's lots of different structures. And each part of that organization has a distorted view of what's going on outside. And when they try to communicate, even when you think that you're communicating, you realize that communication is in the ear of the beholder. And what you said, they took offense at. You're saying, scratching your head and saying, thought I was doing the right thing. That organization is invisible to us, just like the fish. So we need to be mindful of it. The fact that the people around us are making decisions based upon the bowl that they're in. There's this structure, it's often pictured as a triangle, and roughly speaking, in a traditional organization, there are the people who think and the people who do. And it's probably not fair to hit up Frederick Taylor for that, but sort of where that comes from. And then there's us and them, and there's a lot of us and them in every kinds of business. These are the goldfish bowls. In a larger organization, these ladders can extend infinitely, where we have to take things up and down ladders. To make a simple decision, we have to go around the world up and down ladders. So it's very, very difficult to move forward. Now, the key to this is that this is all stuff we made. This isn't like Boyle's perfect gas law. Okay? It's not. This is stuff that was created, these organizations. They were built up over time by people. And as change leaders, we need to gradually communicate the fact that we made these things, we can change them. Like that wall over there. We can change that. We can move that wall. We can change any of this, but we have to be careful how we do it. And why is that? Well, organizational Kaizen, unlike a lot of Kaizen, is a very slippery slope. When you're talking about organization, you are invariably, even though this construct, like a bill of material is a construct that actually defines your production structure. If you have lots of sub-assemblies, you have lots of sub-assembly departments. Okay? They define, I'm not sure which came first, okay, the department or the bill of material. But in fact, it's your status quo. It's there, and there are departments, there's supervisors, there's measurements, there's data, there's all kinds of things which define that. And when you begin to suggest that maybe this is not right, there's this book by Robert Audrey called Territorial Imperative. It's about actually apes in Africa, but it's about us too. It's about how we get our dander up when somebody's moving in on our turf, and that's how it's seen. The minute you say organization, it connotes people. It's a threat to my job. If I even look at GL account numbers, I had a personal experience way back when, this would be back in the mid-'80s, when I was taking people off the shop floor to do training. And somebody approached me with a time card, and he said, Bruce, I just want to let you know that that 1 hour of training that we did, my supervisor put that down as non-productive time. He said, I want to let you know that's a problem. I'd like you to know that. So, I talked to the supervisor, and he says, well, we have these choices. It's either productive, non-productive, or absent. He says, I don't have another choice. So I went to the paymaster, and she said the same thing. This is how we're organized. It was my good fortune that, sooner or later I was able to convince somebody that we coined the term education is action, that this is really important. It's important for people to learn. But that wasn't part of the organization. That data was controlling what I could do. And if we hadn't changed that organization, I wouldn't have been introducing people to, what we now call lean. So all of these things, sometimes it's informal. It's pecking orders. It's who's more important than somebody else. You have all these kinds of issues that you have to deal with. Now, I've visited companies, and I won't say whom, but every floor has a different pay rate. And then I look at them and say, they're all doing the same thing. How's that? We have really funky ways of organizing, different types of reporting relationships. Your building layout is set up to support a type of strategy which is no longer relevant. And it really can hold you back, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But that itself is driven by policies. Okay? And those policies are part of that construct. You can't look at this just as Department X and Department Y. You've got to look at all those things as a whole. It's what we do as people. We're like big hamsters. We're setting everything in order, and we assume that that order, therefore, is immutable, and that's just the way it works. And it's your job as a change leader to figure out how to convince people that it's not really the way it has to be. There's some benefits to us to taking a look at these particular improvements. So today, that's sort of setting the stage. Today, I'd like to offer what my son would probably refer to as some random ideas. They're not in a particular order. They're things that I've learned over the years. I'm not sure if any of them is terribly controversial, but they all tie together, and they're directed to you, the change leader. I'm assuming that's why you're here. You may be the president and owner of the company, and even if you are, you still really don't control everything, and I'm sure you know that. There's things that you need to know. Or you may be in that position where you're managing upwards, and that's usually the way it is, and that's not a bad thing. It's nice to know that you can do that you can actually have that latitude to work with somebody who watches your back. So I've got 12 ideas to cover in the next hour. And if I run out of time, and if by chance there are questions, I will be back in our booth. Actually, I want to see a friend's presentation after mine, and after that I'll be back. And please come by, ask questions if you like. Please give me a call or email me if you like. That's fine. So I've got a cutesy expression here to begin with idea number one. Improvement begins with I. It's some poster I saw somewhere, and I thought, well, that's probably true. And there's three parts to this. It's first of all Mr. Oba's comment that management doesn't know what this is. If we don't know what this is, then we're off to a bad start. And you, in particular, need to have this fixed in your mind. Now, I'm offering my view. It's very prescriptive because I think Toyota's view is very prescriptive. Okay? I don't think true north is a variable thing. I think the compass actually doesn't really point true north. It points to the magnetic north, but true north is only one spot. Okay? It's the same direction. And then there's an improvement model, which I advocate. Again, Bruce Hamilton's opinion. Important, and I'll say why. And then lastly, just some self-reflection. Some people love this line of work. I love it. I love change. I don't care for the stress so much, and I don't like getting beaten up, but I love it when things work. Okay? It's just very satisfying to me. But it's not for everybody. So I want to just talk about that first. That's the first of the points. First is these creating an organization, just recognizing that there's nothing worse in terms of creating this new strategy than having a department which is in the way, which is not needed. Once it's not needed, it becomes defensive. And there are departments that are not needed. If you really would like to run with the amount of inventory that's necessary, you do not need and should not have a stock room as an ideal condition. Okay? In my business, I had 23 people in that stock room, and that was just the people who moved the material. And what do I do? What do I do about that? I need to be thinking about that. So this is from Steve Spear, this is thinking, I'm sure you probably know this, but in organizations that are sort of like Toyota, we're organized for improvement. We're organized to make change. I don't know about you, but on day one, I had nobody to make change. You know, it was something you had to do on Saturday or when nobody was looking. And there was no engineering support. You know, there was just nobody to do it. And the reason was we weren't organized. And why weren't we organized? Well, we had sort of an accounting model that said we don't want to have all that indirect stuff out there. So we're certainly not going to allocate it for this kind of thing. But if you look at this organization, this relationship of, you know, leadership to people who are doing the work, you need to think of this as an ideal. It's part of that ideal condition. If you know, oftentimes when I go to a factory, the ratio of supervision to labor is like 1 to 50. And it's over an acre. You know, the person who's, sometimes they give the supervisor a Segway. They think that's an improvement. Okay? That's a superficial improvement, Mr. Shingo would say. Superficial. All you're doing is automated that waste to the supervisor chasing things around. It's not possible. It's not possible. It's Maury. It's not rational. It's unreasonable. No way it can be done. Okay? So you make an improvement. You need, as a change leader, to begin thinking about, okay, so we don't need 50 people here to do this work anymore. Maybe we only need 40. Okay? We need to find places for those people to go, and the leaders in that group should be team leaders. Everybody moves up. We need to begin creating this organization. It's not a separate thing. It's something you need to plan for and advocate for right from the start, because if you don't, what happens? You know, off with their head. Last in, first out. Get rid of people. Save money. You need to be advocating for that particular type of change real early along, because now you're ratcheting it up. You know, how many times have people say to you, boy, you know, we could make so much more improvement if we only had time. Okay? And you're not organized for it. You're in this goldfish bowl, okay? And you think that you're organized, but you're not. So you need to think about that ideal. And then there's this true north ideal. And, you know, as I said, I can't really talk in detail about that, but the whole idea that you would never pass a defect, that you would produce things one by one, that you would really, truly challenge your employees as intelligent, creative people to address that requires that you have an organization which is capable of that. You can't give people goals and no means. And the means is the organizational change that you can create. Now, when I talk about organizational Kaizen, it's just like any Kaizen. And this is my view, it's small changes for the better. You know, I'm not totally anti-events. I think there's times when you really need to make a step change. But Kaizen, as I see it, is small changes for the better, with minimal pushback, with people who are doing the work being the agents of change and not the objects of change. Okay? It's very important to making this process work. Slogan of my organization, everybody, every day, is all about that. Okay? An organization which makes that change is definitely making organizational change. I get in trouble when I used to say it's not culture, so I've changed it. I've softened it a little bit. I worry about these words, like culture. When I think of culture, you know, is it something in a petri dish? Is it, that's where it came from. Is it, you know, something from the earth? Is it Margaret Mead? Culture is something that means so many things. And I hear managers say, like, our problem is we don't have the right culture. I'm saying, well, who is we, and what do you mean by culture? I mean, let's get this straight. Management has a responsibility to create an environment where people can do this. And regrettably, there's some organizations which were like the poster childs of lean, which were sold, management moved out, new management moved in, and whoo, what happened to the culture? It's all gone. It's gone with the people who are trying to shovel sand against the tide. It's not something that you just sort of set and forget. You do it every day, but it's not something from the people. Culture is something, you know, as a metaphor, culture is something that comes from the people who had no power. It's the poets, it's the musicians, it's the stuff which grows up, and it's irrespective of whatever management comes along. Look, let's face it, business is not like that. It's not. Okay? So let's get it straight in our head when we're trying to make a change. We don't need a culture consultant. We need to have a management team that understands what it takes to let people do their best. This improvement model is something which comes from a guy named Ryuji Fukuda. I'm a big fan of this guy. The very first book that Norm Bodick from Productivity published was by this gentleman, Ryuji Fukuda. He's still around, still out there. We don't hear too much about him. This book's called Managerial Engineering. It's a real simple model, not so easy to follow. But it's all based upon what I would call real continuous improvement. Identify a good practice and then create the environment where it can be practiced. That's management's responsibility. And there's a lot more to that, creating that favorable environment than I can cover today, but it's basically, I'll just use an analogy. Think of your children. I don't mean to sound paternalistic, but whatever you would like for them. You'd like for them to be totally self-actualized, develop as creative, wonderful beings and leaders, and you'd like that for every employee. And what does it take in order for you as managers to do that? You have to create that environment. There's got to be time. There's got to be resources. You've got to allow them to make mistakes. You've got to praise them when they do a good job. Okay? And this is all in Dr. Fukuda's book. It's not a big deal. Keep everybody practiced. It means in good times and in bad, you've got to find time to do this. You don't sort of leave it during the busy season. You may back off a little. I was an operating manager for 30 years, and I know these things ebb and flow, and you need to find the time. But it's so easy to sort of give it up for a while, and then a while becomes a long while. And then employees become disenchanted. Okay, this model is important. And why is this important? Why is everybody every day important? Because every day that we practice the wrong thing, we're getting really good at the wrong thing. Both management and employees. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So this whole model is something, it enables you to kind of sneak up, because this is what you have to do with organizational change. You change the organization, you develop the organization by developing the people within the organization. Okay, the last I here, it's about you. Understanding, why are you in this? Are you in it because you drew the short straw? Because you're the new person in the company? Because you're the new person, actually, for whatever reason you're in it, if you're liking it, you definitely ought to be doing it. And if you're not liking it, it's reasonable to not be doing it. It's not for everybody. I spent 7 years in data processing. Anybody here from IT? Okay. I love that job. My IQ went up like 100 points the day I took that job. Everybody thinks you're smart. And, it's not that there aren't people issues, but it's not so much. Not so much, a lot less. Plus, you get out and get around. It's a lot of fun. So there are good jobs. This particular job is a real down and dirty job. Kaizen is not something where you sit in a lofty position and you give direction. And, frankly, people don't think you're that smart. Okay, so that's your challenge. So how well prepared are you? If somebody comes up to you and challenges you and says, well, what the hell are we doing this for? You got to have an answer. You got to know something about that person. You want to say the right thing. You want them on board. They're saying to you, I could be on board. It may be an angry statement, but they're approaching you. And you got to be prepared, okay? So I attended this lecture by a guy named Hiroyuki Hirano. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is a long time ago also. And he was talking about manufacturing in the 21st century, and it was a pretty dismal lecture. I'm hearing about all the difficulties that people are going to have producing products in the 21st century. I raised my hand. I said, well, Dr. Hirano, what do you recommend? And he says, I'm telling my friends to get out of manufacturing. That was his view. But I think he was being facetious. I hope he was being facetious. He was saying it's not for the faint of heart. We have a lot of challenges. There's just a lot of changes, and a lot of things which are not necessarily, I guess you could say everything has to do with lean or operational excellence, but there's social changes, there's environmental changes, there's regulatory changes. The whole world has gotten so much smaller since I got into manufacturing, even since Dr. Hirano gave this particular talk. You need to kind of just evaluate and say, am I in this or not? Because if I'm in it, I should be in it all the way. And if I'm in it, I need to be prepared. You know, they say this takes luck. But I truly believe that, you know, the quote, that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You've got to be ready for the opportunities when you get them. I'm on to idea 2 now. And this one's a little more specific. You know, you've probably done this before. You're trying to decide, should I do this or should I not do this? Well, let's draw a line down the center of a page and list the pros and cons. This is kind of like that. This is something I did myself, and I found it very helpful. Why? Because it specifically dealt with organization. The line in the middle there would be the status quo from the standpoint of organization. And this is going to be different for every organization. If you're a very small company, you're going to have different constraints than a very large company. But there are things that move you forward, this is the theory, and there are things that hold you back. And the reason you are where you are is there's a dynamic equilibrium. You know, I think that's entropy all over again. It's just going to stay that way unless we find some way to move the line. So you take an inventory. Go to your trusted associates. Take stock of what's going on in your organization. Take a look at the policies. Take a look at the politics. Take a look at the type of organization you're in and make that list. This is your starting point. So you're now saying, yes, I believe that I need to treat organizational development as a separate and unique and distinct aspect of my improvement project. It's not just going to happen by itself. As a matter of fact, if I leave it to itself, it's going to croak me. I have to deal with it. In terms of looking at that current condition, different ways to look at it. How formal is the organization? What form of organization do you have? Organizations are different. And then look at the key relationships. So there's 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions that I looked at and I found this useful. You know, there's a quote that you hear often, and I think this also came from Hirano, that in order to change your mindset, you need to adopt this thinking that the current system is the worst possible. And I think that's generally a good thing to say when you're not saying it's really the worst, although sometimes it is. But whatever it is, could be better. So let's not spend time debating about it. Let's just do something about it. But with organization, boy, these are fighting words. You say the current organization is the worst possible, you may have just generated 6 people who want to shoot you. Okay? Can't do that. You need to have that mindset, but you don't want to be too explicit about this. I'm not saying you need to be sneaky. I'm just saying you need to be tactful. So in terms of the form of an organization, you know, I grew up in an organization that was a family-owned organization. Several brothers. There was dynamic there. I guess I would have called it a monarchy. Okay? There was a way in which things were done, in which changes were made, in which decisions were made. And understanding what that is very important. Where are you? What form of government do you have? Because you need to work within that form of government. If you fight it, you're fighting City Hall. You know, you will not survive as a change agent if you just come across as somebody who hates the current system. In this case, the current organization. So that's one thing. And secondly, take stock of, you know, where your obstacles are. You know, policy is a documentation of strategy and organization. Larger organizations, how many of you come from, let's say, companies over 1,000 people? Just show of hands. Okay. This is much more challenging for you because you probably have a 100,000-page book of procedures and you have a department that makes sure they're all followed. That's that sort of thing. Or they may be split across. Maybe we don't look at those policies. In smaller organizations, the policies may not be written down. They're de facto, but they're there. Understanding how formal that is. It's ironic that underdocumented companies, usually smaller companies, have less change because they don't have that status quo organization of all those policies. It's just not there. So I say here something which can be a little dangerous. This is a cliche anymore. Better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. But the reality is, when you're beginning as a change agent, you kind of have to take stock of what really can be done. To be perfectly honest, in my organization, if I'd asked, the answer would have been no. So I was taking a risk on the bet that by the time management noticed, I'd have good results. Okay? But it is a risk, no question about it. In my view, to not do anything is a much bigger risk. This is why you kind of have to decide if you're in this or not. And also, in terms of moving the organization forward, whatever you can do to not tear down what was there, to indicate that you're building on it. You know, I've almost misnamed this presentation when I called it obstacles, because that's a fighting word. That's a word that says I think something or somebody's in the way. I probably should have chosen a different word. Okay, we need to kind of build on what we have. It's a good policy anyway. In terms of relationships, you know, these exist. There are friends, there are places where you go to get the straight scoop, there are straw bosses, and there are sacred cows. Take stock of those. You don't want to be duking it out with the sacred cows. Okay? So understand what those groups are. Idea number 3. Find the opinion leaders and win them over first. These are often people with no authority. And there's a quote here from Kurt Vonnegut, not exactly an industry guy, but his brother worked for GE, so he probably got this idea that in addition to a leader and a visionary, you need somebody to let everybody else know these guys are okay. Okay? An important idea. Get those early leaders on board. And when you hear dissatisfaction, it means they're approaching you. It means they're saying, I don't understand yet. I need to be sold. Sell me, please. When you're making these changes, no one should lose face. This is a major concern in organizational development, that somebody wins and somebody loses. You want to be really careful. Nobody has to lose face. There doesn't need to be repudiation. We can build on what we have. And when you're thinking about how you approach people, that absolutely needs to be your approach. There's a corollary to that, and that is, particularly with managers and supervisors, you've got to be really careful, because they can become enemies really fast. And I guess this last point here down at the bottom is you should never upstage your boss. Okay? I don't think I'm telling you something you don't know, but I've known people who are no longer employees who just got too full of themselves in this process. Your job is to make your boss look good. Whoever that person is, that's what you need to do, because now you've kicked it up a notch. Now you're managing upwards. You put your boss in an embarrassing or compromising position, you've not only damaged your career, but you've damaged the development of your organization. When you communicate with people, watch what you say. I mentioned this earlier, but communication is in the ear of the beholder. What you're saying is not necessarily what people are hearing. The English language period, but in particular the English language, can be very vague and can connote all kinds of issues. Here's just a few expressions, and I know you have them on your slides, so I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I can't tell you how many times I hear people use the term idiot-proof, and that's really insulting. Or high level. What's a high-level job? That implies a low-level job. What's that mean? What's that mean about me? What are you saying about me? You know, and rather than breaking down barriers, maybe we need to expand boundaries. You may think this is fluff, but it's not. It's not. The words you choose change the thinking of the people who are outside the goldfish bowl. You need to think about them when you speak. Don't fight. Never fight. I guess there's one exception to that, and that is the surprise attack. You know, if you feel like you're desperate and nothing else can work, I don't advocate that personally, but that's what surprise attacks are about. If you feel you have no other way of winning, but if you can win, you shouldn't fight, and if you can't win, you probably shouldn't fight either. You don't want to get into a fight. You want to create a win-win situation. You want to create, as Richard Carr says, an infinite game, something where everybody wins. When I say go see here, that's a popular expression these days. But I'm not referring to the GOSI that we hear about in the lean world so much. I'm saying get out of your plant. Go take a look at organizations, and you're probably doing this now. You don't have to go to Japan, although it's not a bad thing. You can go to Minneapolis, or you can go to Chicago, or you can go to the town next to you. There are organizations, local networks. This is what GBMP is about. We're about creating a network where companies can go and visit each other and learn something and talk to their peers. So they see this organization. They see that this change can occur. They see that change in data and change in GL account numbers and change in the way payroll is processed and all those types of things which might seem impossible now seem possible because somebody else is doing it. And in particular, they're hearing about it from somebody they trust. They're hearing about it from a peer. A peer could be a CEO, could be a purchasing agent, could be a shipper, could be a sales order entry person. It doesn't matter. You need to go see. And incidentally, internal tours can really be great for expanding barriers because there's tons of barriers in your own company. Now, there's walls, there's real walls, and there's figurative walls. You just don't go there. There's people, and I see this all the time, they spend 25 years in a company and never talk to the person who's in the next department. Never talk to their internal customer. Don't even know what's going on. I had this happen in my own business. I'm embarrassed to say, we were a Shingo Prize recipient back in 1990, which is really ancient history now. And then we got a lot of tours. People come in. We get these double-decker buses coming in to see our little company. And people come through, and they proudly show what they had. One day, this welder, Mike, talked to me. He says, Bruce, he says, it's nice that these tours are coming in. He says, but wouldn't it be nice, if we had a tour for our own employees so that, I could see where these welded parts go. He says, I go down there, I talk to them. But it'd be nice to kind of have a discussion the same way you do with these outside folks. He was now a change agent. He was saying, Bruce, we need to change this organization. We can't be compartmentalized like this. You've developed me now, but now I need to help develop the organization. So go see is really important here. So we did a video a while back. One of our things that we do is create videos for, I call it, for people with short attention spans, which is, pretty much everybody. And so this one just dealt with this particular topic, that this has to do with the prepared mind. When you get lucky sometimes, but only if you're prepared. There's going to be instances where you can change the flow of things, where you can make a significant change, and your answer or your body language can make a big difference. And you need to be on the lookout for those. It's a shame that our lives are defined so much by those moments. And life is a continuum, but actually those moments make a big difference. And if you just think personally in your own life, there are little points where you made a decision or said something, and it changed the course of history. And as a change leader, you have that opportunity to have huge leverage suddenly. It's waiting to happen. You just have to be on the lookout for it. So I found over the years that for some reason when you write something down, people think it's more legitimate. Also, I will say that written word is much more clear than a spoken word. Verbal communication can definitely be confounding. People hear different things. But when it's written down, if people kind of forget, you can go back and say, no, look, this is what we wrote. This is what we said. So when we make these changes, we now begin to redocument. We begin to say why we did this, why it's important. And by the way, it's not just you. You're now trying to spread this around. There are other people like Mike the welder, people who are writing this stuff down. Because the pen is definitely mightier. It's not only mightier than the sword, it's definitely mightier than the spoken word. So around this point, and this is, again, my personal view. A lot of companies talk about strategy deployment or policy deployment or Hoshin. It's a great idea, but it's tough on day one because management absolutely struggles with what can be done. And in terms of the deployment part, if you only got 6 people participating, it's not going to be a big deployment. This is the everybody, every day part. You've got to have a lot of people involved. But you get to a point where there's organizational readiness. We're ready to do this. We need to figure out what to do next. And now you have that opportunity of a lever where organization truly can follow strategy. Because we've already loosened up the thinking. We've unfrozen the minds. We're already making little organizational changes. We've already done that. Now we just like to have more direction, please. So policy deployment becomes very valuable at that time, not just to set the strategy, but to define how you're going to do it. Hoshin is goals and means, and part of that means is having, the right organization. So Ryuji Fukuda, he was the creator of this X-type matrix, and people tell me it gives them a stiff neck to look at it, and I think when they say that probably means they're not really thinking about it right. It's just a construct for thinking about what's important, and part of that is, having some sort of systematic thinking, having gone through a process where you've really decided what's important, and part of that process should include, and how do we organize? How do we change organizations? It is, I'd said earlier that I've never seen an organization be successful without some kind of leadership. But I've also never seen an organization successful with this kind of improvement without some substantial organizational change. I mean, really heavy-duty stuff. Departments totally different names. Different, it doesn't have to be different people. The same people can repopulate and do different things. And when this is successful, every one of those people will say, I was pretty apprehensive about this at the start, but there's no question in my mind this is so much better than it ever was. Because I changed it. Because it was me. Because I'm the change agent. I'm not the object. It was our organizational change. And it was very important. We understand why that's important. They call that tacit learning. It's why it doesn't really matter. I don't give a care what happened at Toyota or some other place like that. I want to know why this is important here. And now I understand why, and I'm part of this new organization. So it's inevitable that there are early leaders in this change, and then there are people who are on the sidelines, and it's somewhat of a normal distribution. Not every organization is the same in that regard, too. And I'm talking about the entire organization here, to be sure, not just the shop floor. There are, you may have, when I say caboose, you may have a department which comes to mind. They are your target. You need to figure out what are we going to do about that. But this little lesson from Ryuji Fukuda, again, something that he drew this picture. He didn't drew this picture. His was a little better. They said, you just need to focus on the people with the red faces. Give them everything. You need to clone yourself. You need to have more people so you can create this critical mass. Somebody asked me, it's just a hard question to answer, like, when do you know that you really are over the hump? And I don't know that there ever is an answer for that. I think, you're always shoveling sand against the tide. But there is some point where you get into a meeting of some kind, and you find that there's more people in the room who feel you aren't moving fast enough than there are people who think you're moving too fast. Okay? On day one, it's heavily skewed towards the people who think you better take your time with this. And as you move along, that changes. Okay? So we need to have more oars in the water, and we need to be working one-on-one. We need to expand the boundaries between departments. Notice I've not used breakdown barriers here, or obstacles. I'm saying expanding boundaries. Those are Richard Karst's words. Richard Karst he made an observation which for me was very critical, and this wasn't about manufacturing at all. He said, all change occurs. It doesn't occur when people fight about it. When people fight, they set up sides. They crystallize as viewpoints. Change occurs when people fail to take the current system seriously. You think about, why did the Berlin Wall come down? Was it because of a big fight, or is it because people just said, it's no longer relevant. It's no longer us. And that's your target. That's what you need to be creating for that organization. And in order for that to happen, you've got to have more people rowing. So you develop new leaders. And you expand pilots. Expand to adjoining departments. You go outside your company. You're now expanding. It's like that pebble in the water. The waves are going out because you now have something which is rolling. You really have continuous improvement. And why? Because you have an organization which is doing it. It's not a mezzanine squad. It's everybody. I'm getting near the end here. I think I'm probably pretty close to my tack time. It's very valuable to have some sort of peer evaluation, third-party validation, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the people who are doing the work, they're real people, and they like to know that somebody cared. They love talking about what they've done. They learn by teaching. Very valuable from that standpoint. It helps to crystallize that new organization and expand it. So whether you choose, doesn't matter really what model you choose. Today there's Industry Week's Best Plant, and that's great, and there's some great recipients for that. And there's the Shingo Prize and AME, and there's state awards. It's not for the sake of putting a trophy in the lobby. It's for the sake of reflecting on what you've done and having a group of your peers visit and tell you what they see so that you can do more. Okay? It's a very good way of expanding this and finding your gaps. And lastly, you need to start to build new traditions. So, I'm a big Ford fan. I think yesterday's presentation was just great. It excites me to see the company that in many ways started this process coming back. And so I end with this quote from Henry Ford, which maybe I won't read it, but basically this was his thought, that we need to create new traditions, because a lot of the way we're organized today is just based upon old traditions. As a change agent, you need to document those stories. You need to document the new heroes. You need to create the lore, which is going to carry you forward with this new organization. So those are the 12 ideas I have, or as my son would say, 12 random ideas. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. My phone, my email, and don't forget to go to Old Lean Dude. Just put a post up yesterday. For spring, I celebrated spring. You can figure out how that relates to lean, but you'll find out if you log on.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And a round of applause. Tremendous talk. And we do have a few minutes for questions, so by all means, do we have some questions for Bruce? Yeah, sir.
I work at an organization, our site has about 700 employees that have 6 departments. And you talked about identifying the opinion leaders and winning them over. Would it be more important for implementing change of this type to get those opinion leaders across all of those departments on board, or to concentrate on a pilot area and get them won over first?
Yeah. So I have a strong opinion about that. I think there certainly are other valid opinions, but what I learned over the years was that you put all your eggs in one basket and you watch that basket. This was what I was taught, and I tried that across the board, and you get that, to use the cliche, a quarter-inch deep and a mile wide issue. So it's best, if you find somebody who's taken the lead, try to focus your resources. Depending upon the resources that you have, usually you're resource constrained at the start to make those changes so that you have some sort of a showcase you can go to. And you now have peers that people can go to, say, yeah, we tried this, it's okay, it wasn't a bunch of bunk, it's actually working for us.
One of the challenges that I'm facing is we've kind of got past that, as you mentioned, more people wanting to go faster than not wanting to go. And some of the challenges I have is as the teams, we do a morning walk basically every morning. And I usually don't go on the walk. Usually it's the teams that are hammering on. But because they're starting to get more and more engaged, they'll stumble across another opportunity, and then they'll want to have a meeting on that opportunity and start getting it going. And my struggle is bringing them all back, coming back to the strategy for 2012 and then future to say, we've got a parking lot this one because we are resource constrained, and it's great that we're engaged, but we can't get them all done. We got to come back to the ones that are in the strategy.
Yeah, so I think you're doing exactly the right thing. If over time, what you'd like to have is more and more people making more and more change faster and faster. Okay, so there's less resistance, so it's easier to make change faster because people know what they want to do, and that's all great. But my experience is that if you are earnest about this and you are trying your best to make change, people will understand that everything can't be done all at once. They just don't want to see nothing happening. Okay, and certainly if you have some sort of policy deployment, it's very good. That's where you can point back and say, you know, this is a really good idea, but we've decided this is what we need to do. That's our focus. Okay, well, thank you. Please come by our booth. I'll be there later if you have any other questions.